why she is traveling up and down the great state of California saying that the stimulus bill has been a success. $752 billion of taxpayer money, and let us review how successful the stimulus bill has been. When the stimulus bill passed in February of 2009, the unemployment rate here in Riverside County was 12.3%. Today, the unemployment rate in Riverside County is 14.5%. Across this great state of California, our unemployment rate is now 12.3%. When the stimulus bill was passed, it was 10.2%. We have 21 counties in this great state of California with unemployment above 15%. Of the 12 metropolitan areas in the United States of America with unemployment above 15%, California has 10 of them. And California is a test case, a proof positive of what happens when government gets bigger and bigger, taxes get higher and higher, regulations get thicker and thicker, entitlements get richer and richer. What happens? Our cities are bankrupt. Our state is, for all practical purposes, bankrupt, and we are destroying jobs every single day in this great state. And I think, unless we begin to change the people that we send to Washington, D.C., that not only will California deteriorate, because it is precisely that path that we are on with the policies that Barbara Boxer has supported for her many long years in Washington. Bigger government, more debt, more borrowing, more printing money, more taxpayer money, more spending. In fact, while the people of California are struggling with 12.3% unemployment, when you talk about underemployment, it's probably 20+%. While the people in this great county are struggling with almost 15% unemployment, federal government employees have grown by 14.5% this year alone. We are building government bureaucracies in Washington, D.C., while we are destroying private sector jobs. And we now know through recent studies that federal government employees make, on average, twice what a private sector employee makes. And of course, just as a reminder, a federal government employee doesn't pay, a federal government job doesn't pay for itself. Taxpayers pay for them. A private sector job pays for itself. We have to start creating jobs in this country and in this state. And we have to get out of control government spending under control. So let us talk about what that really takes. Well, you know what that takes, and I know what that takes. I started my career the way most people get their start in this great country. I started out, yes, I did get a degree in medieval history and philosophy from Stanford University. Yes, laughter is the appropriate response. I mean, it was a great education, but you know, at the end of that, I was all dressed up and nowhere to go. Really tough to get a job with that degree. And I worked my way through Stanford University as a Kelly girl. Many of you may remember Kelly girls, but we were young women who were hired out as temporary secretaries. And one of my very first jobs as a freshman in college was to type for the shipping department of Hewlett-Packard. And I will date myself by telling you that the great technology breakthrough at that time was the IBM Selectric typewriter. It's really sad. My granddaughters don't even know what a typewriter is anymore. And when I talk about that little bottle of whiteout, they don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, that was the big breakthrough. When I graduated, I went off to law school at UCLA. I hated law school, so I quit after one semester, and now I needed to go back to work full-time. So I took the first job that was offered to me. I was offered a job typing and filing and answering the phones for a little 9-person firm. I got my start in a small business. It's where the vast majority of Americans get their start. 2/3 of the new jobs in this country are created by small businesses, family-owned businesses, entrepreneurs. Small businesses, family-owned businesses employ half the people in this country. And small businesses and family-owned businesses are the path to the American dream for so many groups. Women-owned businesses, Hispanic-owned businesses, Asian-owned businesses, African-American-owned businesses. The small business is the path to the American dream. And so if we want to create jobs in this state and in this country, we have to start by making it easier, not harder, for small businesses to form, to grow, to prosper, to hire. That is why one of the things that I have proposed is a 2-year payroll tax holiday for all small businesses for every unemployed worker they will hire. We have to deal with the death tax. We cannot ask family-owned businesses that have been created through generations of hard work to, in essence, have to sell off all the results of that hard work when someone in the family dies. Agriculture is disproportionately hit hard with the death tax. 55% it goes to on January 1. I personally believe we must repeal the death tax once and for all so that family-owned businesses can reap the reward of their hard work. What else do we have to do to create jobs? Well, we have to start fighting for every job, as hard as other states and other nations fight for our jobs. Now, I ran a big business. When I left Hewlett-Packard, it was $88 billion. We had over 150,000 employees. We operated in every state in this country, and over 150 nations around the world. I know exactly why jobs are leaving this state. Let me tell you what Texas does to get our jobs. They give companies great tax breaks. They make sure they have access to credit. They help them cut through the thicket of regulation. And believe it or not, that's exactly what China does as well. So I believe we need to acknowledge that in the 21st century, any job can go anywhere. And the jobs we lose now may not come back. So instead of asking job creators to fight with both hands tied behind their backs, why do we not use the power of the federal government to help them fight for every job in this country? And that means to me that we create right here Jobs for American zones, where instead of bailing companies out, we give them a tax holiday if they will bring manufacturing facilities back to this country and hire people in our state and in our country. Where we give a new company a 5-year tax holiday if they will locate here instead of go somewhere else. Where we will make sure that the power of the federal government is used not to crush businesses with the burden of regulation, but to help them cut through the thicket of regulation. And where we make sure as well that, in particular, entrepreneurs and innovators and small businesses get access to credit. Since the bailout of Wall Street that helped pad the balance sheets of big Wall Street banks, over $1 trillion worth of credit has been withdrawn from small businesses and consumers. And community banks that were not part of the Wall Street meltdown are now being hamstrung by a set of regulations that were designed to be one size fits all but have nothing to do with what these banks are trying to do right here in your great county. So we have to make the right tax breaks to encourage small businesses. We have to fight for our jobs now by using the same weapons that others used against us to take our jobs away, by creating Jobs for American zones. And finally, we have to decide that we are going to be the leader in innovation once again. We have always, as a nation, we have always been the leader in innovation. But we are not so certain to be that leader anymore. We have something, as you know, called an R&D tax credit. Every year, that tax credit has to be reauthorized and renegotiated. Many years, it sort of drags on for months, so nobody can plan around that tax credit. And by the way, that tax credit is now somewhere between 16th and 19th in the world. We have to decide as a nation that we will lead in the innovative industries of the 21st century. And we know what those innovative industries are: green tech, space tech, infotech, biotech, We have to lead in those industries, and the only way we can lead is to encourage innovation, to make sure that we are equipping our workforce to go into those innovative industries, and to decide that the United States of America is not going to be somewhere between 16th and 19th in the world. We are going to be number one, again, in innovation. Now, I mentioned regulation a couple times. And most of the regulation that gets created in Washington, D.C., big businesses can deal with, because they can hire lots of lawyers and lots of accountants and lots of advisors. But small businesses can't deal with it. And the thicket of regulation that has been erected around businesses in California is choking them. I believe that we have to be good stewards of our planet. And I believe that we have to be environmentally responsible. And I know that fish and frogs and flies are important. But so are families. And families have to have jobs. So let us use common sense and compassion to find the right balance between protecting the needs of the environment and protecting our families. And let us make sure that when we go through regulatory reform or pass another piece of legislation, that we acknowledge the reality that a 10-person business cannot deal with a regulatory load in the same way that a $90 billion business can. All of these things have to be done, and none of these policies has Barbara Boxer ever championed. I actually think it makes a difference that we send someone to Washington who's created a job, who's met a payroll, and I think it makes a difference hugely now that we send people to Washington who aren't afraid to ask the kinds of questions that are necessary to cut spending. I mentioned that while California is dealing with 12.3% unemployment, that the federal government is growing its employees at 14.5%. Imagine the federal government has increased its budget every year for 60 years, regardless of what's going on in the economy, regardless of how government bureaucracies perform. It's just more money year after year after year. Until today, we sit with $13 trillion worth of debt growing to $20 trillion in less than 5 years. The truth is, we have grown accustomed to career politicians. And the truth is as well that we have grown accustomed to a level of lack of accountability and incompetence, and in some cases corruption in the federal government that we would not tolerate anywhere else in our society. And finally, we have to begin to hold Washington accountable. Now, I happen to believe that we cannot have new taxes for anything right now. You know why I believe that? Well, it's kind of common sense that we learn from the real world. If you have a business or you have a family member that has a spending problem, you don't give them more money. We keep sending Washington money and they keep spending it. So if we're going to get spending under control, the first thing we have to say is no more money. Now, I happen to believe that we have to cut government spending, but we could start with something basic, like slowing the rate of increase. There has been a bipartisan bill, Claire McCaskill and Jeff Sessions, a bipartisan bill designed to slow the rate of increase of our federal government spending to 1.3%. Barbara Boxer has voted against it 4 times. My goodness, if we cannot even slow the rate of federal spending to 1.3%, we will never get this problem under control, and we will never hold government accountable. And let's start with something else pretty basic. Let's put every agency budget up on the internet for everyone to see so we know how our taxpayer money is being spent. Because the truth is, we don't have a clue how they are spending our money. And when we find some things out, it's usually horrifying. You know, the city manager in Bell, California, turns out it was property taxes paying for this. Of course that's going on in the federal government. In fact, there have been 2 studies that indicate that there is $500 billion worth of waste and abuse and potentially fraud in our federal government budget. I have no doubt of that. Let me tell you a little story about why I have no doubt. Because when I was 32 years old, I was asked to manage a group of engineers for the very first time. And you have to remember, I'm a medieval history major. I'm a secretary. I'm a law school dropout. And managing a group of engineers was intimidating as heck. And my boss says to me, Carly, these engineers engineer so that we can purchase $2.5 billion worth of stuff every year. And we think that bill is too high, and we think you got to figure out a way to cut that spending bill. So I thought about that. I didn't know how to tell these engineers how to engineer. I thought, well, what am I going to do? So I thought, well, maybe I'll look at a bill for this stuff. So I looked at a bill, and I found a mistake. And I looked at another bill, and I found another mistake. And 18 months later, we had 90 people looking at bills, and we had found $300 million worth of mistakes. Now, I have managed billions of dollars for 20 plus years. I will guarantee you this. You show me $1 billion that no one is accountable for, no one scrutinizes, no one's asked the tough questions about whether they're meeting performance benchmarks or how they're spending the money or why they need more. I'm going to show you hundreds of millions of dollars worth of waste. It's precisely what we have in our federal government budget. That's what all the studies say. Let's start by getting after that. Because it isn't Washington's money. It's your money. You can applaud, it's okay. I mentioned that we tolerate a lack of accountability, a lack of performance on behalf of these vast bureaucracies in Washington, D.C., and we wouldn't tolerate it anywhere else. And I'll give you an example. Today, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, there is a story about drug violence in Mexico. People are hanging from bridges in Monterrey. Citizens are being beheaded. And we now know that across a lawless stretch of border between Arizona and Mexico, that the United States has told citizens, stay away from this because we can no longer protect you. It is the federal government's job to protect the border, and the federal government has to step up and do its job. But it is also the federal government's job to create a guest worker program that works. And we don't have one today. And so we educate people in our fine universities and they leave and go home. We have agriculture, restaurants, technology, huge and important industries in this state that depend on a guest worker program, and they don't have it. Now, what is Barbara Boxer's response to this? Her response is to call the Arizona law unconstitutional and do nothing. Whatever you think of the Arizona law, to do nothing to hold the federal government to account and to ask them to secure the border for the protection of our citizens. And when there was an opportunity to pass a guest worker program in 2007, Barbara Boxer voted for something called the Dorgan Amendment. The Dorgan Amendment killed the guest worker program. It passed by one vote, Barbara Boxer's. And when that guest worker program fell, the entire comprehensive immigration reform bill fell. And when she voted against a guest worker program, her comment was that immigrants are a source of cheap labor that threatens the American worker. Barbara Boxer has not acted in the interests of this great state. She has not acted in the interests of the people of this great state. She has stood in the way of job creation and stood always on the side of special interests, big government, thick regulation, and high taxes. I mentioned that I've never run for public office before. And I mentioned as well how I got my start in a little business. And sometimes people ask me, why are you doing this? And I am doing this because I think these are important times. I think these are consequential times. Our country was founded on a radical idea, a truly radical idea. And that idea was that everyone has potential, that everyone has potential, and that everyone has the right to fulfill their potential. This country was founded on the radical idea that it does not matter who you are or how you start or where you come from. You have a right here to live your dreams. The American dream is a unique concept in this country, all around the world, and I have traveled all around the world. Nowhere but the United States of America could a woman who started like me become the CEO of one of the largest companies in the world and have the privilege to run for the U.S. Senate. That is possible only here in America. But I am running because I believe the American dream belongs to everyone, not just to those that somebody far away in Washington, D.C. decide it belongs to. The American dream belongs to everyone. And when we destroy a job, we do much more than destroy a job. We destroy a dream for someone and their family. If the American dream is going to belong to everyone, then we must provide the opportunities for people to live their dreams, and we have to give them the freedom to pursue those opportunities. That is why I am running, because I think we must now decide that California once again will be a great and golden state. And we called this the Golden State not just because of the color of our hills in the summer. We called California the Golden State because this was the land of opportunity within the land of opportunity. This is where people came to live their dreams. This is where people came to come up with a brand new idea and try something totally different. And now, what do we see? We see unemployment rates that are much higher than the rest of the nation. We see innovators and entrepreneurs giving up and going away, and we see businesses of all sizes, small, medium, and large, pulling up stakes, closing their doors, shuttering their factories, giving up and going away. California must be a golden state once again, and California cannot be that golden state unless we change what happens in Washington, D.C., unless we make our government accountable and have it working on our side once again. And we cannot change things in Washington, and we cannot make this a great and golden state once again unless we are willing to change the people we send to Washington. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen. I will be happy to take your questions.
Carly, we have a couple of questions from board members.
Okay.
And so our first question is going to be from Brian Hawley. He is the chair of our Governmental Affairs Committee. Brian?
Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Transportation issues and grade separations are issues that plague Southern California. You may have experienced a few of them on your way in here today. I was wondering
I've traveled on a lot of freeways in California this year.
I was wondering what your thoughts are on these issues and what your plans are to address them and build infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, first, California has not invested in infrastructure of all kinds for a very long time. Transportation infrastructure is one such place where we are behind in our investments. Water is another place where we are behind in our investments. I mean, the state's population has doubled in the last 30 years, and yet we have not made the investments we need in water storage or conveyance, in highway transportation, etc. Let us start with something really basic. We send a lot of money every year to Washington, D.C. in the form of federal income tax. When Barbara Boxer first went to Washington, D.C., we got 93 cents on every dollar back. Today we get 78. Let us get our fair share of federal income tax dollars back in this state so that we can make the investments that are necessary. And let us hold our elected representatives, particularly our senators, accountable for moving the bills that matter to the people of this great state.
Carly, we have another one right here. Paul Jessup is the chair of our Business Education Partnership.
There you go, sorry.
So we're right over here.
Thank you for visiting with us today.
My pleasure.
The past decade has seen an effort, I'd say a bipartisan effort, to increase the federal government's involvement in public schools, primarily through President Bush's No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, and now with President Obama's call for a set of Common Core standards in mathematics and the English language arts. What do you believe to be the appropriate role of the federal government in public education?
Well, first, I think there is a role for the federal government in public education, and I support President Obama's Race to the Top initiative. I think we are playing politics with our children's future and their education when we cannot complete in Washington, D.C., a transition from No Child Left Behind to Race to the Top, and that puts local school districts in a state of uncertainty. The reason I support Race to the Top, if it is executed the way it was designed, is because what Race to the Top fundamentally does, and you as an educator I'm sure know far more about it than I do, but fundamentally what it does is it connects money to performance. Performance where it counts in the classroom. It connects the issuing of grants to accountability for performance in the classroom. And I think that is what we need. Now, I will also quickly say that money alone does not solve our education problem. And California is proof positive of that. Because in California, we actually spend a fair amount of money per pupil. We spend at a rate higher than almost 3/4 of the states in the nation, and yet our performance on behalf of our students is down at 48 or 49. So money isn't the only problem, and it isn't the only solution. And too much of the money here in California is spent perhaps in places other than the classroom, on administration, on special programs. So I agree we got to tie money to performance. But I think at its core, education is about teachers who are teaching in the classroom. There are many, many, many fine teachers, and we need to give them the freedom to teach. But we also need to hold them accountable for whether or not they do teach.
Carly, one last one. Ken Stream, past chair of the chamber.
Thank you for caring enough to accept our invitation to come and speak to us today. My question relates to the job issue. There is pending in Washington comprehensive global warming legislation that has cap and trade provisions, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, but the administration strongly is touting it, and I believe your opponent strongly supports it. And the advocates claim that it will create hundreds of thousands of green jobs. However, there are business advocates who question the numbers and indicate that it may destroy more jobs than it actually creates. Can you tell us what your position is on that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, first, I am very proud to have received the endorsement of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the California Manufacturing and Technology Association, who endorsed for the first time in their 92 years, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, and without exception, all of the organizations that I just mentioned have the same point of view on Barbara Boxer's cap and trade legislation as I have. It is a job killer. And there have been several studies done on that piece of legislation which suggest that it will cost this nation trillions of dollars in lost economic output and millions of jobs. Scientists tell us that a single state or a single nation acting alone cannot make an appreciable difference in global warming. And unless and until China is willing to have a serious conversation, then we're not going to make an impact here when, you know, almost 1/3 of the particulate matter over the skies of Los Angeles comes from China. So let us be smart about this. Let us have a comprehensive energy policy that says that we in this country must take advantage of every source of energy we have in an environmentally responsible way. Let us decide that we will be leaders. Yes, we will be leaders in clean, green technology. But how can we be leaders in clean, green technology when it is virtually impossible to build a new manufacturing plant here in California? How can we be leaders in clean, green technology when we are not willing to lead in nuclear technology? I believe the government has a very important role in basic research. The government is a poor arbiter of who's going to win and who's going to lose. So let's encourage innovation. Let us take advantage of every source of energy we have: wind, solar, tide, nuclear, oil, natural gas, clean coal. China is spending $4 billion a year on clean coal technology, and we are going to run far behind in that race. Cap and trade does not reward innovation. What it does do is punish consumers of fuel, punish producers of fuel, and it will cost this nation jobs. And in the end, it won't make a bit of difference in global warming. That sounds like a really bad deal to me. Thank you so much for having me.
I just want to say thank you to Carly for being here on behalf of the Chamber and sharing her